Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. It is January 26th. You are being recorded, just to let you know. I'm Melissa Atkins, and I will be your webinar facilitator. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. If you look at the top of your screen, you will see an icon of either a person with their hand raised or just a hand. With that icon, you can either raise hand, agree, disagree, or step away. Now your screen should look similar to the graphic here. To the bottom left, you will see a box that says Files. Here you will find today's presentation. Please feel free to download a copy for yourself. Simply click the item you would like to download, then click the arrow pointing downwards, and you will be prompted to save or print the materials based on your device's permissions. The second box that states Web Links To houses today's survey, as well as any other links that are found throughout the presentation. Lastly, to the right of the screen, we have a chat box available. This is how you will communicate to the instructor and NLC staff. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to interact by using the chat box. Simply type your message and hit enter, or click that up arrow icon button to submit. We encourage class participation, so please feel free to write in those questions or comments. Tech support issues should also be submitted here. Here is a quick course description of objectives of today's webinar. The training description for today's webinar is tribes across the country have used a low-income housing tax credit, LIHTC program to develop or rehabilitate more than 6,100 housing units in Native communities. The program has provided more than $883 million of equity for tribal housing projects with funds that do not have to be repaid. Representatives from Raymond James Affordable Housing Investments, Benjamin will be here to help assist. We'll join the discussion to cover the steps to take in order to successfully use this funding resource to meet the housing needs in your tribal community. Training objectives to expand knowledge and capacity for tribes to leverage a key tool for affordable housing development in this country. The Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, implemented by Congress in 1986, it has helped develop more than 3.5 million homes across the U.S. To help tribes exercise their own sovereignty to access this extremely valuable resource in the same way that other developers across the country are doing, to highlight other tribal experience and lessons learned taking advantage of this program. And with that being said, Adam, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen back to you. And if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself and begin today's webinar.
Great. Thanks so much, Awista. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, so just give me 1 second.
No problem. Thank you for the both of you being here today and teaching today's webinar.
All right. Can you see my screen now?
Yep, perfectly.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone, for taking the time out of your day today to have this conversation. To start, my name's Adam from Travoy. I'll talk a little bit more about Travoy in just a minute, but I've been with Travoy for going on 16 years. I'm really fortunate and thrilled to have Ben Shockey from Raymond James. Raymond James has been a tremendous partner in Indian country since its inception and since tribes started using the housing tax credit program all the way back when our work started in 1995. So I'm going to let Ben talk about himself in just a minute as well. I also want to thank the Native Learning Center today. I think this is a tremendous platform and a resource that they make available free to all their partners. Everything from topics like we're going to cover today to site planning, to affordable housing design, to personal finance. So again, I really can't commend the Native Learning Center enough for the work that you do and for the resources that you make available, both through the webinar, through your podcast, through your conference. I know that there's an upcoming clean energy conference that Native Learning Center will be hosting in February. So again, lots of tremendous opportunities to take advantage of, and those are all free all the time for their partners and participants. Just a little bit more about our team. So Travoy, our work started and continues to work exclusively with tribes and tribal housing authorities. That work really centers around two funding resources. One being the housing tax credit, which we're going to talk about today. The other, new markets tax credits, is for things like community facilities, admin facilities, wellness facilities, healthcare clinics, treatment facilities, broadband infrastructure. So again, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that particular resource today. We're going to spend most of our time talking about a resource called LIHTC, Low Income Housing Tax Credits. Again, one of the reasons that we're passionate at Travoy, and I know Ben feels the same way, is that this is a resource that can be extremely, extremely valuable when it comes to meeting affordable housing needs in tribal communities. It's a resource that fundamentally, ultimately, does not have to be paid back. It's an equity program, and it's not debt. So it provides a funding resource that, in many instances, works extremely well with tribal resources. So if, again, we're going to talk about it in more detail, but it works with things like competitive IHBG program, NAHASDA funds. All of those resources enable this type of program to be able to work, where you can use housing tax credits to pay for most of the project and then ultimately minimize the tribe or the tribal housing authority's contribution to the project. In that capacity, in Awista's introduction, I appreciate her mentioning the 6,000 homes that have been built or rehabilitated across Native nations in this country. That's a huge number, and we're proud to play a very, very small role in that, working alongside our tribal partners to move housing needs forward and economic development needs as well. But I think that $893 million number is very important. Across that billion plus of project cost, $893 million of that has come from the program. Again, direct investment into tribal communities that does not have to be paid back. So again, that's 6,000 plus homes that have benefited from this resource. I don't know how many families exactly that translates into across those 6,000 homes that have either been built new or rehabilitated by tribes, but lots and lots of families have benefited from this program. And fundamentally, I know that that's what motivates both me and Ben in the discussion today, is getting families into good quality housing. We do help with a number of other smaller grant programs that can work and be layered on with housing tax credits as a primary funding resource. One of those is the Affordable Housing Program through the Federal Home Loan Bank. You can see there that number on the screen, $34 million. That's in addition to that $893 million that we've helped tribes raise of equity. So again, further offsetting the project costs. On the right, these are just four of our most recent awards that we just found out about last month. Red Lake, Turtle Mountain, Laguna, and Lac du Flambeau. You can kind of see the scale of that particular program. Again, that's not going to be the focus of our discussion today, but any given project can receive from maybe $400,000 on a smaller project to upwards of $750,000. Some federal home loan bank districts do have a little bit more, but I mention that just because it's an extremely valuable resource that participants should be aware of as another supplemental funding source. We also have had the privilege to partner with our tribal clients more recently in a design capacity as well. So working alongside on the tax credit project, this is just a snapshot of some of our work over the past 12 or 15 months or so. All of these in red are reflective of relationships where we're acting both as their finance consultant to help the tribe navigate this competition that we're going to talk about more today about how this funding resource works. And then also as their architect of record to help design the project. And we're going to talk about more examples where that's been applicable as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben and let him introduce himself and Raymond James Affordable Housing Investments.
Yes, thank you, Adam. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be invited to participate in this. And I echo what Adam said in that this is such a great session. The low-income housing tax credit, or we call it LIHTC, is such a valuable asset to communities just around the country and in general. And states and for-profit, nonprofit developers compete heavily to utilize these and access these. And so for that reason, this is a great session for our tribal partners to become familiar with it and understand how they can access it to benefit their communities as well. Yeah, Raymond James has a long history with working with tribes and using LIHTC, and we've invested more than $600 million going back to 1999 was the first tribal project that utilized tax credits to build housing. And we're very proud of that. And, it's such a good benefit to the tribes that use it. In fact, we've gotten through nearly 2,000 units that have been all the way through the 15-year compliance period, and then we turn those units back over to our tribal partners. So they've been built or rehabbed, and they've gone all the way through the compliance period, and now they're using those again, and potentially could use tax credits again for those units to rehabilitate them again. So there are so many good stories about how these tax credits have been used to transform communities and make a big difference in individual lives, but also, for our tribal partners that have this huge housing need that they're trying to address, which, obviously anybody in this call is well aware of. So that's my brief introduction to Raymond James, and we're just very excited about what these projects can do.
Yep. Thanks for that, Ben. And I want to just reiterate something that Ben mentioned, that Raymond James, Ben personally has been with the firm, with the company for quite a few years, but Raymond James, their partnership with tribes goes back across those 200 projects that I mentioned that Travoy has been with. I don't know what the exact number is, but it's probably easily 70 or 80 plus, right, Ben?
We're up to almost 150 projects.
Yeah. So just a tremendous amount of work directly with tribes and tribal partners to help them use this funding resource. Our contact information is there on the screen. I'm going to put it on the screen as well, but I didn't know if anyone wanted to take a quick screenshot or anything before we get into it, if anyone has to jump off early. So feel free to write those down quickly. Or I know that the PowerPoint, the slides are in the chat down at the bottom. So Wisdom pointed out that in the files section down below, you can download the entire PowerPoint. Our contact information is here kind of at the beginning, as well at the very end, is if you want to reach out. And I think what I want to reiterate there is that both Ben and I, we love being a resource for tribes and tribal partners that are thinking about housing. So that could be at the very early phase. Maybe you already have a site identified, but please feel free to reach out to us anytime. We love brainstorming ideas. We love talking about, like, okay, maybe there's some limited resources that are available. How could we potentially make this into something bigger? So, I know that I have no problem helping with any type of call that groups make about that, or to brainstorm ideas. And I don't want to speak for Ben, but I think that he feels the same way, and that feel free to reach out to either one of us in that capacity, just to start thinking about ideas, and happy to talk about what we've seen with other groups, what could work, where a starting point could be to move something forward. So with that, I'm really excited to start the discussion. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of projects today, but two recent ones that we've had the opportunity to partner with our tribal partners as well as Raymond James on. So these are collaboration projects involving lots of different partners. In this case, this is a project at the Dry Creek, developed by the Dry Creek Rancheria in Sonoma County. So Ben, do you want to just kind of walk us through what this project looks like on the ground, kind of what they're trying to achieve with the unit mix, and we can kind of take a look at this in more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. So Dry Creek, this is a very exciting project, and I'm not sure if everybody on this call is aware of, some of the unfortunate history in the state of California with a number of their tribes, but these will be the tribe's first housing units under management, and they have really a very limited amount of land to build on. So this is land that they control, but it's not trust land at this point. So that it's land that they owned. But this has really been a long time in coming. They've spent years trying to plan this, to control the land, applying for tax credits, and even tax credits in the state of California haven't been awarded to tribes until the last several years. So it's just very exciting that they were able to access this. And we just closed this project. Like I said, it's 25 single-family homes. And what's interesting about it is they you can see the site plan kind of has a unique shape to it, and that is because they're situating it kind of between the existing rolling hills, but also trying to leave any existing oak trees in place, so it'll really kind of blend into the natural landscape there. But yeah, this was we invested more than $14 million in this project. It's a combination of 2 and 3 bedroom single-family homes, just north of San Francisco, maybe an hour and a half in Cloverdale. And the tribe's headquarters are about 30 minutes south of there, but most of their tribal members are kind of interspersed throughout that community. So this will be a great central point for those people, and they're very excited about it. And Dry Creek as a partner has just been great. They're very hands-on. They're very engaged. Their leadership was fully engaged and on board with the process and understanding that there were going to be challenges in getting to closing and figuring out all the steps involved, but everybody was on board, and that makes all the difference. And so we're under construction now, and can't wait for it to be complete and to have people living in those units and making a difference for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, I think that's a great kind of segue into more discussion about due diligence on the project side, how this is a collaboration effort between partners. But you said it, that really Dry Creek, there's a couple things that you said. Number one, the amount of time that they spent planning this process at the front end. This literally has been a project about 4.5 years in the making to get to the point where they could start construction. So a lot had to go into it on that side. But I think also the other thing that you said was a partner that is willing to acknowledge that every project is going to have challenges. But that said, if you go in and say, hey, we have a team assembled that can work through all of those challenges that come up, that's, I think, extremely crucial. And I think in this case, that was so beneficial to the project and ultimately to those families that are going to benefit from those units. When those challenges come up, it's not about throwing in the towel. It's about, okay, how do we all put our heads together? Every project is going to have its challenges. Sometimes those challenges vary pretty drastically. Sometimes they're a little more straightforward. Sometimes they're quite challenging, related to construction costs or permitting or annexation. I think this project is probably on that end where it really did have some pretty substantial challenges. But with the team kind of being willing to go in with it from the onset and say, hey, we know these challenges are going to exist, but we're committed to our community. They were able to work through that with you guys as a partner, with Travoy as a partner, with Travoy Design to finally get this project under construction. Anything else to add to that?
Yeah, and a lot of the challenges here were timing. They had to communicate and collaborate with local municipalities, which is always a challenge no matter who you are. Yep. And then it all had to be done by a specific date because that's the way the state of California works. So, it was nothing that was anybody's particular fault. It was just a lot of pieces had to move into place at the same time. And so, those are the type of challenges that we're talking about here. But that's what's most important to us, is really finding a partner that is really committed and can be flexible and make a project work.
Yep. So I think that is a great project, kind of representative of fee land, California, extremely, extremely high construction costs, and that probably the highest in the country. Single family detached units. So this project in a lot of ways is, kind of different in a lot of different ways, similar in some ways, but it's definitely got its differences as well. So the first picture that I want to point to here at the Pueblo of Acoma is the picture in the upper right-hand corner. I don't know if anyone on this call has had the opportunity to visit Sky City, the historic Pueblo at the Pueblo of Acoma. It is one of those experiences that really just kind of takes your breath away and makes you realize how important this cultural preservation aspect is for tribes and the work that they're doing every single day. And that, this is a community that has been thriving for thousands of years and has inhabited that particular pueblo literally for thousands of years. And their culture and the future of that community really depends on the ability to have good quality housing that can accommodate elders, that can accommodate families, that can accommodate low-income families. So that picture in the upper right-hand corner is a picture of the historic pueblo at Sky City at the Pueblo of Acoma. And I think that I say that because that really sets the context for what they wanted to do with, their most recent housing developments at the Pueblo of Acoma. So I'm going to hit play here, and I'm going to let Ben kind of talk about more specifically what this project looks like and what it includes. Ben, go ahead.
Sure. So this is two separate projects that were developed, I think four or 5 years apart. And each of them is 30 units, a mix of 2 and 3 bedroom units. And, you can see that they're built side by side. The first project is to the north there. And what's really interesting about this, of course, is, as you can see, is it's made in the traditional architectural style of the Pueblo there. And so that was very important to them. And it also incorporates some really interesting things in terms of rooftop balconies, so that there are sight lines, for a family to be able to look out over, the basketball court and the playground and be able to see their kids, be able to see what's going on. So there's a safety aspect there that I think is very important to people. Not to mention it's really nice looking housing. These are the first 2 LIHTC projects that they've invested in. And so we put in $13 million combined on these 2 projects. And what was amazing actually about the first one is that after the development fee is paid out, or was paid out to the Pueblo of Acoma, that actually exceeded their cost in the project. So that first project, which is now to the left, was fully funded without tribal resources. And so these are just really great looking projects. They're on reservation land in Acoma.
Trust land. So in this particular project, the permitting was kind of the complete opposite, a 180 from the project at Dry Creek, right? I mean, so all we were dealing with here was the tribe as the jurisdiction with authority over the project. So in this particular case, there was no zoning change that was required. There was no annexation process that had to be required. Trust land, so we did have to deal with and work through the process to get title status reports. But in a lot of ways, just representative of kind of the difference, like it doesn't really matter. Both projects, housing tax credit projects by tribes can be on fee land, they can be on trust. That factor has no impact, right?
Right, and so they still had to go through their processes, but they didn't have to work with an outside county or city.
Right, exactly.
But in terms of challenges, the second one closed during COVID, so you never know what the challenge is going to be, but they persevered. They're getting it done, and the leadership there, just like Dry Creek, is highly engaged. The forward thinking, they're available to handle issues as they arise, and including global pandemic. So these projects got done, and they're very happy about them, and it's going to make a big difference for a long time.
Well, and you look at these projects, and I think one of the things that really just strikes me is just how important these are. And we've heard it from the Pueblo of Acoma themselves too, that from a cultural preservation standpoint, language there is a function of elders passing it down to their grandkids. Floyd talks about his dad and his son, and how they spend so much time together, and his son is learning language from both his parents and Floyd and his wife and his grandparents. And this type of project is really intended to facilitate that very thing, where this is a community project. This is for the community. It's the Pueblo of Acoma exercising their own sovereignty to say, hey, this is what we want for generations to come. This is how we can continue to thrive and grow our community for the future. And I think, again, like Ben said, just a tremendous example of leadership, perseverance, and kind of forward thinking as well. You can see here that this was not just a single project that they had in mind. This is part of a much bigger effort to think more broadly about how they can leverage their own limited resources and really get the most housing built for their community in the shortest period of time. I think most importantly, again, like Ben mentioned, $13 million of equity contributed by Raymond James on this project. That's the portion of the project that does not have to be paid back. So this housing becomes much, much more financially viable with a contribution at that scale when we're talking about using a resource on both projects, two separate projects, but both in this instance use low-income housing tax credits as a primary funding source to get this done. I think the other thing that strikes me, Ben, is, you look at this project now and kind of these projects side by side and compare that to the historic Pueblo. And like you said, like it really has that same feel. It's creating that same sense of community that has endured and has been so important for thousands of years at the Pueblo of Acoma. So with that, I want to dive a little bit deeper into how this all works. But I think before we get there, I just want to reiterate that I think everyone on this call understands what this is about at the end of the day. This is about the opportunity to get families into good quality, affordable housing. And that's what drives us here at Travois. That's what drives our design team. That's what really drives our Travois New Markets team on the economic development side as well. At the end of the day, it's about playing a small part. These aren't our projects. These aren't Ben's projects. These are our tribal partners' projects. We've had the ability and the fortune to play a small role helping on these projects. And it's personally motivating to me just to see the chance for families to have good quality housing that they don't have to think about where they're going to stay or, what they're going to do because they don't have good quality housing. They can focus on childcare, or they can focus on, getting their kids to school, or, going out and finding a job. All of those things are much easier if you have good, safe, quality housing over your head as a starting point. So that said, I want to give a little bit more context to this resource called housing tax credits. Ben mentioned it before, but this is actually a very long established program going all the way back to 1986. So a lot of people don't realize how politically entrenched this program is, but this is a program that very, very widely has bipartisan support across the board. And one of the reasons, Ben, I think that is that this is really a program that is in every single state. It's in every single county. It benefits, all kinds of different housing types, and is by far the biggest generator of affordable housing in this country. Is that right?
Yeah, and it does enjoy bipartisan support. There's such an acute housing need just generally across the country, and it's a program that's meeting that need. So that is the nice part. It has a nice long track record at this point of working, and we really, the point of this meeting is to really help tribes understand how they can access that as well and how beneficial it's been over time.
Yep. So again, like across the country, this program has done 3.5 million homes since its inception in 1986. The tribal portion of those homes is still just a fraction of those, maybe 6,000 plus. There's other tribes that have used it as well outside of the collaboration with us, but still just a tiny fraction. And the first tribal project wasn't until 1995, right around that area. And, so the program had been in existence for almost 10 years, and there hadn't been a single tribe that had used housing tax credits. And yet it's intended to be the biggest resource for affordable housing development. Can you, Ben, maybe just talk about housing tax credits with tribes is not the only thing that you do at Raymond James. It's the only thing that you personally do, but Raymond James has a much bigger portfolio as well. So can you just talk about, kind of why this tool is important across the country, whether it's for-profit developers or nonprofit developers?
Sure. It's really a big part of, if you just think about local municipalities, cities, counties, states, in terms of their plans of addressing needs in their communities, it's a big part, and it's competitively applied for by a lot of developers, and so Raymond James has invested in more than $1 billion of affordable housing every year for, goodness, probably 5 years now. Maybe it's more than that. But in total, I think we're up to $14 billion. And
Yeah.
so the tribal portion of that is about 600 million. So you can see it's kind of a small piece. But it's, like I said, basically every county or city, they want this in their, for their community because of how beneficial it is. And, it brings a lot of investment, brings a lot of jobs, training. And so it's a huge economic development tool as well as a tool for housing.
Yeah, I think all of that said, it's just highlights one of the many reasons why tribes should have the same access to this program as every other developer in the country. The unfortunate reality is that, since 1986, that access has not always been the same. So just to give a little bit more context to that discussion, again, Ben mentioned that this is a competition. We're going to talk more about today about how that competition works. But for till about 6-7 years ago, there was not a single tribe in California that was able to use low-income housing tax credits. And yet, by sheer number of tribes in the country, it has the largest number of tribes of any state. And yet, there hadn't been a single tribe that was able to use low-income housing tax credits. So one of the things that we continue to do is advocate for and work with our tribal partners to help them communicate how important it is at the state level, at the state allocating agency level, that tribal housing needs are recognized as unique. Oftentimes, they are impacted by the trust land status. A lot of times, state agencies don't understand what those differences mean. They don't understand what title status reports are. They don't understand what tribal sovereignty is. So I think a lot of steps have been taken and progress has been made to increase and expand the access to tribes to have the same access as every other developer in the country. Some states now have formally adopted specific set-asides of these housing tax credits, recognizing that tribal housing needs are unique and that there needs to be a path to be able to access these. California is one of those states. Arizona has some recognition of that, North Dakota and South Dakota, Oregon, but a lot of that has come with years and years of work with our tribal partners to really communicate what that need is and how tribal housing needs, they are different, they're unique, and that this resource has to be on the table because we all know that your NAHASDA resources aren't going to go far enough to meet all the needs that you're expected to meet on a day-to-day basis. So again, we see this as a resource that enables tribes to use and exercise their own sovereignty while also using a funding source that can pay for most of a project's cost. Ben, I think going into a conversation like this is usually how it starts. We talk to groups, you and I talk to groups all the time, and they say, hey, we might have 100 families on our waiting list. We might have 250 families on our waiting list. And I think the reality for most groups is even if you do a project, your waiting list may not necessarily change. You're creating more homes, but there's still a need for many, many more. Anything to add just about, what you see with tribes and their waiting lists?
Yeah, well, NAHASDA just really hasn't grown, but waiting lists have grown, and so that's something that's easy to really track in the IHBG data. And I think Adam gets to it later, but the only way to address that is by leveraging the resources you have to essentially create a multiplier effect, and that's what LIHTC allows you to do. Because if you just build 5 homes at a time, it's just going to take too long to catch up, or if you even can. So, having these opportunities to maybe build 30 or 40 homes at a time gives you the opportunity to actually, start to make a dent in some of those long waiting lists.
Absolutely. I think the other thing that a lot of groups don't necessarily realize is that housing tax credits, there is a path where it can be used for to create home ownership opportunities. That comes with some other caveats. The program has to be rental for the first 15 years, but clients, our tribal partners, can come up with a program kind of from the onset and move in families and put that opportunity on the table from the onset to create a home ownership opportunity that can be available to them based on the structure of their own program, the housing's own program, policies and procedures, to create those home ownership opportunities after the 15-year compliance period. I think another thing that oftentimes gets overlooked is that this is a very, very viable resource to provide funding to rehab units at a very large scale. So maybe a tribe has 500 units or 100 units or 50 units in their current assisted stock, their formula allocation current assisted stock units. And maybe those units, they haven't really been rehabbed since they've been built. Maybe it was the mid 80s and they need new flooring and new cabinets, a big injection of funding to put new roofs and maybe new energy efficient and insulation into those units. Low-income housing tax credits is absolutely a viable mechanism to rehab 30, 50, 80 of those all at one time. And we're talking large-scale rehab. You know, maybe it's $80,000, maybe it's $100,000, maybe it's $120,000 of rehab per unit to bring it back to new condition. That is absolutely permitted and allowable with the housing tax credit program. I think the other thing that we see is that, you know, it's a tool that wherever your population needs are, you know, it could be elder housing, it could be family housing. Your tribe could be saying, hey, we've done a lot of family units, but we really need to focus on some smaller elder units for our young professionals to give them a place to live and to encourage them to come back to our community after they get out of college. This resource, again, is absolutely a program set up to accommodate those needs for sure. So I think before we get into, go ahead.
Sorry, I know you can't see the questions, so I just wanted to let you know that Mariah had a question. She wanted to know, what are the costs on average to prepare a competitive LIHTC application? Many tribes, as you have mentioned, have limited NAHASDA funds to expend on their affordable housing programs, let alone pre-develop and planning.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think it varies from group to group. I know that the way that we structure our work is that, you know, we see this as a resource that is only going to be beneficial ultimately to the tribe or the housing authority to the extent that you get that resource in hand. So we defer the vast majority of our fee until after we help you get an award of tax credits. So oftentimes that looks like, you know, maybe it's a percentage of the overall cost, a contract agreement, and maybe we charge a fourth of that or a fifth of that to do all of the work for a year's worth of planning to go after the tax credits. At that point, you know, I know our structure is that we only are interested in, you know, charging the balance of that fee to the extent that the project is able to move forward. So in that instance, we also, I know that our setup is we'll do a free resubmission, understanding that sometimes this competition, there's factors outside of everyone's control. You know, we may go in and collectively say, hey, like, we don't know if we can make this homeless commitment. And that's fine. But sometimes a single point can be the deal breaker in a competition. So, you know, we can do everything that we can to put a strategic and competitive application together, but we have no interest of charging that fee, charging that additional fee until we know that you have this funding resource in hand. And then ultimately, until a team like Ben's is in the deal where you have access to that equity to sign a construction contract and to move a project forward. I think just kind of broadly when I'm thinking about this, again, I'm kind of thinking about like, okay, if housing tax credits can be the primary resource and provide the big chunk for housing development, then we could start to figure out, okay, is there a place for a reduced amount of tribal funds? Is there a reduced, could we leverage this big resource and then minimize our NAHASDA contribution that's going in? Could we use these other resources and then go after, say, a $750,000 planning grant to assist with this project? Can we start with, say, $7 million on a $10 million project of tax credit equity and then further offset that with a competitive IHBG? I think the answer to that is yes, absolutely. Those are all good ways to think about it. I kind of think about it like, let's go after the big chunk first, and then that makes going after the smaller chunks a little bit more manageable. So what I want to do is I want to spend just a few minutes kind of talking through a scenario of what this potentially looks like. I do see that there's a couple other questions as well. Let's see.
Do you want me to read them to you, Adam?
Yeah, go ahead. And if you don't mind.
Yeah. So Jody said sample journal entries for the booking of expenses when the NAHASDA grant has to be charged first before the LIHTC.
Okay. Yeah, and then I see that about deferred fees like environmental and how those all fit in. So I think that that's great context to kind of looking at holistically what a number scenario for an actual project looks like. So let's look at this scenario. These are actual numbers from a project that closed in December at the Pueblo of Laguna. So we looked at the Pueblo of Acamas project. That project is now complete. It closed right mid-COVID. And so it really hadn't been impacted to the same extent that some of the more recent projects have as far as construction costs. So I thought this one could be a little bit better, more accurate example of what current market conditions look like, both on the construction side and on the equity side. So in this particular instance, this was new construction. They're going to build 20 homes for families, a mix of both 2 and 3 bedroom units, about an average of 1,400 square feet. In addition to that, there's going to be a standalone community amenity, much like we saw at the Pueblo of Acama project, where that will be a space, a commercial kitchen, a gathering space. That's all part of the project and part of the assumptions of what's being built with the tax credit project. In this particular case, they had a construction contract of about $7.2 million. That was in addition to the infrastructure amount that was about $2.4 million on this site. So very, very expensive infrastructure. That's not uncommon for a lot of our tribal projects where groups just don't realize how expensive the infrastructure can be. On a per square foot basis, this came out to be about $248 per square foot before any contingency was factored in. And again, that's not including the contingency. That was just to build the vertical units themselves. In this case, in all cases, we sort of start with an assumption that there are going to be general contractor fees applicable on a project. A tribe can choose to act as their own general contractor, but oftentimes it ends up as a third-party general contractor. So we want to make sure that from the onset, we're building in an assumption about the fees applicable to that contractor. In this particular case, the $7.2 million number, that's reflective of the actual construction contract that they signed. So all of those GC fees, overhead profit, those are all part of that contract that they signed. Above and beyond that, when the Pueblo of Laguna closed with their equity investor, they built in another $363,000 of contingency. So on top of the construction contract, there is a resource for them to draw on in the event that there's cost overruns for the project. They have, of course, every project is going to have professional fees. In this case, that's a combination of multiple different fees, professional fees, architect, survey, legal, environmental, and then a bucket of soft costs that sometimes I like to describe as, sort of the tax credit specific costs. So there are a few expenses that have to be incurred that may not be applicable if you were just to do a straight NAHASDA project. So one of those is like a market study. A formal market study is required with the tax credit application. You oftentimes have to pay for a final cost certification by a tax credit accountant. There's a fee usually paid to the state that's proportional to the amount of tax credits that you request. So again, there's sort of a bucket of cost that we want to make sure is included from the onset, applicable to the tax credit transaction itself. In this particular case, they funded another $163,000 reserve. So they'll actually be able to draw down on that as the project grows over the years, and as it extends out, they'll be able to draw on that reserve as an asset. And then in this case, as is the case with all of our tribal projects, partnerships, we're not the developer. Ben is not the developer on the project. In this case, the Pueblo of Laguna is acting as that role of the developer for the project. So we have a $450,000 developer fee built in that we'll see in just a minute how that ultimately comes back and translates into a benefit for them at the Pueblo of Laguna. I do see that there's a question, and it says, I'm working on a reuse plan, which requires me to show a plan and possible future funding for an apartment complex. Is tax credit manageable? If not, what smaller chunks should we go after? Yeah, I mean, I think that this is sort of the scale of project that we would talk about. It's not a resource for just 2 or 3 units. It's usually a resource where maybe you're rehabbing 25 units or 20 units, or maybe another opportunity, Ben, is groups can combine rehab with new construction as part of the same project, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that's kind of the nice thing about the low-income housing tax credit program is you're going to make an application to your state agency, and you can structure it in a way that makes sense for your community. So whether it's for families, elders, whether it utilizes VASH vouchers, it could be for veterans, a combination of new construction and rehab. There are a lot of ways to make this make sense. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. And as you saw with the Pueblo of Acoma, they made it make sense for their community. So, and I guess kind of getting back to Mariah's question, maybe I don't know if you have a specific answer, Adam, but if you're talking to a tribe about how much do I need to budget for the fees up front that we'll have to incur before we get to closing, that will include the ESA, the market study, some fees like that. What do you typically tell them? Hey, here's the budget you kind of need to have accessible to yourself, just to get you to closing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate, because I didn't specifically answer that, so I appreciate you asking me again. I think around 60,000 is a fair assumption for all of the soft costs and what you need to submit a tax credit application. So again, like the end goal there is, how do we get to a point where you can minimize the expense to get this resource in hand? But that's going to cover things like any preliminary design that might be applicable. It may include, any type of fee that your tax credit consultant might be charging. It's going to include some allowance for a market study. It's going to include a little bit of allowance for a limited amount of legal work that's needed to form the limited partnership to submit the tax credit application. So there is some cash that's required, but ultimately you don't incur the majority of those costs. And I'm going to go back to this one here. So like your architect, for instance, you're not going to have full construction documents at the time of the tax credit application. Typically, you're not going to engage your surveyor to do a full-blown ALTA survey until after you have an award of tax credits in hand. So at that point, you do know that this commodity is in hand. There's a very, very extremely high likelihood that you're going to have an investor partner to essentially partner to provide you the equity to this project. So that's when the majority of the costs would be incurred, is after you get an award of tax credits in hand. And I would say that between $50,000 to, I don't know, maybe $75,000 total for all of the due diligence to submit a tax credit application would be a reasonable amount to assume for a project to build maybe 30 or 35 new homes. Ben, any other thoughts or anything that you've seen related to that?
Nope, that makes sense. I was just wanted to make sure we answered that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you reminded me of that. So on this particular scenario, I'm going to go back here again. We're going into this scenario assuming an $11.5 million project. That's inclusive of $2.5 million of infrastructure, the vast majority being vertical construction, some other soft costs, those reserves. So all in, everything needed to get this project off the ground with that contingency also built in. We'll call it an $11.5 million project. In this particular case, this project is going to generate about $7.8 million of equity. So again, we're going to get into this in a little bit more detail about how this all works. But in this particular instance, the tax credit benefit that's going to flow over a 10-year period is about $9.3 million. So fundamentally, what happens is those tax credits flow over a 10-year period. However, you need the benefit up front. So the way that this transaction is structured is that the tax credit partner pays you up front for the stream of tax credits that they receive over a 10-year period. So in this case, that would amount to about $7.8 million of equity to help make this project feasible. In this particular instance, the tribe had already committed. They knew that they had $2 million worth of funds that they wanted to commit to housing. And they wanted to stretch those dollars as far as they could with that ARPA contribution. And they knew that they could get more out of it taking a strategy like this, but that $2 million was already on the table. So we're taking that out of this calculation. Then in addition, they knew that they could go after and pursue and be competitive with another affordable housing program grant through the Federal Home Loan Bank. Again, totally separate program, but it can never provide as much subsidy as the tax credit program. But that $750,000, that's extremely valuable. That's money that the tribe in this case doesn't have to put in, that's offsetting their contribution to the project. So all of that said, after this grant was awarded, the net contribution sort of to begin the project and to get things rolling full speed ahead after they get reimbursed from the grant, the tribe is coming up with about $936,000 in addition to these other sources of funds. But what ends up happening is at project completion, again, the project built in a developer fee. And that developer fee is contingent on a whole bunch of different factors. One of them being, kind of lease up on the schedule with the tax credits being delivered as promised. But assuming that all of those things kind of come into place, that developer fee ultimately comes back to the tribe and can offset that initial contribution. So Ben, can you talk about some of the reasons why that developer fee is important? I don't know if you have any insight into how it actually comes back as non-program income to the Tribal Housing Authority as well, so that can be a benefit.
Sure. Yeah. So, developer fee, again, for non-tribal projects is, one of the big reasons that developers do this. They're earning a big fee. That's how they, make money, and they pay their employees and things like that. So it's a big incentive. And for a lot of tribes, maybe that is used just to reduce their total cost of the project. As I pointed out with the first Acoma project, it actually ended up being a true fee in that, it exceeded the total cost at the end of the project that they had to put into it. But a lot of tribes can use that, again, like I said, just to reduce their cost of project, or maybe to use it as non-program income for whatever wants or needs they have, to address some of their other priorities, or maybe to then provide essentially seed money for the next project they want to do. So it really gives them a chunk of money to get the ball rolling on other goals that they may have.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. So at the end of the day, I mean, between ARPA, between Affordable Housing Program grant in this case, the huge amount being paid for by the housing tax credit equity proceeds, this is a project that, the tribe is basically paying pennies on the dollar to do a 20-unit project. Again, with the huge chunk of that coming from the equity program, the low-income housing tax credit program. So, Ben, this is sort of the next point that I think is absolutely fair when we're talking to clients and prospective groups about this funding resource. Well, this sounds too good to be true, right? Like there's got to be some type of catch to the program or something, right? Or paperwork or compliance headaches or something. And, I think that, with this type of funding level, $7 million on a $11 million project, it is going to come with some paperwork, and it is going to come with some expectations specifically around tenant incomes of the families to benefit. So unfortunately, I wish that I had a better answer today that housing tax credits is ideal for middle income housing needs. I know that that's a need in every single tribal community out there. This is not ideal for like the 80 to 120% AMI range. This is, in exchange for that big injection of equity, the federal government is saying, hey, we're going to make this resource available, but we need to ensure that it's being rented to families at or below 60% area median income. And then the states have the ability to further incentivize further deeper income targeting above and beyond that. So one of the things that I thought could be interesting is I just pulled two random counties that I was thinking about. Washoe County in Nevada, I know Sparks is in Washoe County. It's very close to Reno. And then another one that I was thinking about was Clallam County. Jamestown, Clallam, I think, is near Clallam County, in Clallam County. So I wanted to put these on the screen and kind of compare, because they are slightly different on a county by county basis. So every single county has their own set of particular tax credit limits. So for Clallam County, you can see that a household of 4, you're going to be serving population at the high end around 47,000, and you would have some households at the, say, 23,000 range roughly. Now, again, that's dependent on household size. But if we're talking about a single family detached project, maybe it's a 3 or 4 bedroom unit, again, that would be the incomes that you would be looking to target across the board on a particular project, with the vast majority of the homes being at 60%, 30%, or 50%. There is an opportunity where on a sort of limited case by case basis, you might be able to do a few 60 to 80% units, but those would have to be averaged with lower income units to get to 60% as a whole. Now compare that side by side with Washoe County. I think Sparks, Nevada is in Washoe County. So here's those limits for a 4-person household in Washoe County. So you can see they're slightly higher. You're serving a slightly higher population, but again, these are determined on a county by county basis, particular to this this funding resource, low income housing tax credits. Ben, anything else that you want to add about what income targeting, what you see kind of typically across tribal projects and how that fits in?
Yeah, it's I know more and more tribes are trying to hit that middle income band, but obviously this is primarily targeted toward 60% of area median income and less. And most of our tribal partners, I would say all of them, really have had no issue filling that need or having enough need to fill these homes. But fortunately, there has been some recent development in terms of something called income averaging, not to get totally into the weeds, but that gives tribes a little more access for that income band of 60 to 80% of AMI.
Yep.
So that's expanded a little bit recently in a meaningful way. So yeah, those are the income bands. Of course, that's really going to be different between, say, South Dakota and Dry Creek,
Yep.
who's just north of San Francisco. So
Yep.
it really depends on your area.
Yep. So we talked a little bit about how the level of benefit, we're talking not a few $100,000, we're talking about millions of dollars of potential benefit. We talked about how ultimately this is a credit that flows automatically over a 10-year period. So when a group goes in and gets tax credits, Ben, there's nothing that they have to do to reapply in future years, right? They get one award of tax credits, and that might be, say, $1 million, but really automatically assuming compliance with the program and assuming that they're renting to low-income families, that's $10 million, the commodity that they're going after at the end of the day, right?
Yes, you get an award of credits that occurs annually in a stream of 10 years. And so those tax credits are essentially the asset that your tribe or your tribal entity now has and is providing to the investor in exchange for the investor's dollars. So that's when you said, is it too good to be true? Or, we're not just essentially making a donation, we are contributing equity in exchange for tax credits.
And that's where you make your financial return, right? Because tribes don't
right.
need the tax credits. What they need is that money to make their project happen at the front end.
Right, exactly. So yes, you get it in a stream of 10 years, and this is where really in terms of you're asking, what's the catch, is that it is a 15-year compliance period.
Yep.
The credits run over 10 years. So when you pick an investor, you're picking a partner that's going to be with you for 15 years. And so that's why it's important to have a consultant, to have an equity partner that understands these projects, because we're going to be there with you, helping to make sure that this project succeeds over that 15-year period. And that's really one of the important things that we provide in particular, but also why it's important. Who is your partner? That's so important to us because we are partners for 15 years, and it involves some compliance, involves some paperwork. And that can be from time to time, that can be a lot, but having people that understand what they're doing to help you move through that process is really important.
Yeah, so let's just continue right on that same topic, because I think one of the other terms, and kind of a confusing kind of role, is you hear about investors and where they fit in, and then there's the syndicator and where they fit in. Raymond James and your team at the Affordable Housing Team, you're a syndicator, right? So what do you do as a syndicator, and how does that relate to kind of this more generic term of an investor in a tax credit project?
Yeah, so the syndicator is separate in most cases from the end investor in that we have a pool of investors that are looking for tax credits, but they may not be, it could be banks, could be insurance companies, large institutions, but they may not have a team in place just to do specific tax credits. So they bring in a syndicator like Raymond James to then help provide them with the underwriting and the understanding and expertise for these projects. So we have a large pool of investors that we line up for each specific project in order to, for the project's benefit, provide the best possible pricing and, amount of funds coming into the project from the investor.
Right. And then, so this doesn't oftentimes really, I mean, a group may not even know exactly who ultimately is the investor that's benefiting from the at the upper tier, it's called, as far as these tax credits. But Ben mentioned it, that there's entities out there like banks, insurance companies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, those types of groups. They have sometimes it's a legal requirement under Community Reinvestment Act. Oftentimes they're trying to offset their own tax liability, but they may not have the capacity internally to want to underwrite a real estate transaction or to make equity contributions directly into a project like this, right? So they rely on you guys as the syndicator to kind of fill that role. So when a client like Dry Creek is closing a project, they're working with you. You're on that call every single day, every single week. They're the face, they're the partner that they understand, but ultimately you could be helping invest those tax credits on behalf of another entity. Is that right?
Right, and in some cases it's multiple investors. It could be 10 investors into a single project. They're just contributing a small piece, and so that's really a important piece of the role of the syndicator or Raymond James is bringing those together. But also we bring the expertise, and we're your partner in going through that 15 years, both for the tribe's benefit and for the investors' benefit, that we have that infrastructure and expertise in place.
Absolutely. Yep. And we've already kind of talked about this, but I think it really starts with the population that is most important for the tribe or the tribal housing authority to serve in the short term. So that could be elder housing. It could be more single family detached units. Maybe you're thinking about, okay, how do we build more housing? We have 300 open positions between the tribe and the casino, but there is no housing that's within an hour. How do we get workforce housing on the ground to be able to fill those positions and to drive our economy forward? So again, that's absolutely viable to think about from a standpoint of how do we get workforce housing on the ground? Again, this program is not set up to do home ownership immediately in the short term, but it is very, very viable if you're willing to put a program in place that would follow your policies and procedures, where those families can ultimately become homeowners after the 15-year rental compliance period. I mentioned this project. This is a project at Socogon because the other thing that's very, very interesting is that oftentimes there could be an existing asset that's in the community, and maybe it's no longer serving its useful life in its particular way. So this is an old motel at Socogon. What they did in this particular project is they converted that old motel building into 24 supportive housing units for veterans. So I think this is a really interesting opportunity for groups because that infrastructure cost, Ben, that we talked about, it's incredibly high. So to build new construction on a detached subdivision that maybe it's a quarter mile away from existing infrastructure, that's going to be expensive infrastructure to put in that has to be done just to facilitate that vertical construction. Where sometimes there could be a resource, an asset that's already in the community where you can totally, restore those units, all new, everything. You can bump out, you can add on units, in this case, they added a kitchenette and expanded those hotel rooms. They kind of doubled the size, knocked out some of the walls. So this became 24 supportive housing units for veterans using rehab and using housing tax credits in the process. This is another great example at Hinckley at Mille Lacs Corporate Ventures, where they don't have good quality housing, and yet they are by far the biggest provider of jobs in the community. So the Grand Casino Mille Lacs employs several thousand people. They have several hundred openings at their casino right now. But the closest housing that's available is 60 minutes away. So they said, we need to be thinking about housing development from an economic development standpoint. And how can this fit into our overall strategy? What they've done is they've said, okay, there is a tribal housing authority. We're not impeding on their territory at all. All we're doing is collectively working together to kind of fill the different needs that exist. So there's certainly opportunity for multiple groups to be thinking about housing at the same time without taking away from the other one. So I think this is a great example of that. It's not limited to tribal members exclusively. They market heavily to their employees at the casino who live about, in this case, a quarter mile down the road now. So they have this great quality housing. There's a park right on site. This building with the white roof, kind of half shown there, is their clinic and their pharmacy. So there are services right by that the tribe has developed directly that makes it pretty enticing for, they filled this unit in 2 days. It was totally booked up. And now they're working on their third tax credit project at Mille Lacs.
Hey, Adam, you got a question from
Yeah.
Linda? She's asking, is there anything happening on the federal, state, or local LIHTC level to take into account of rising construction costs in addition to income limits? The county comparison you shared, income levels may be less in one county, but construction costs may be higher in that county. If this isn't talked about, what can we do?
Yeah, no, this is extremely, extremely important. And this is a challenge across the board in the tax credit world, because oftentimes the state and their ability to recognize what the costs are on the ground isn't always in lockstep with how costs are changing in the actual market. And sometimes, Ben, I don't know what your experience has been, but I think sometimes there is hesitancy on the state level to believe that construction costs are as high as they currently are. And so they'll say, oh, well, you can build housing at $150 a square foot. Well, maybe in their bubble, that's possible. But in the real world, that's not the world we're living in. So I think one of the challenges is that sometimes states do recognize costs changing. And over the years, the total amount of tax credits to any one project has changed and has grown over time. But I think one of the challenges is that they don't always necessarily keep pace with construction costs. So sometimes they're a couple of years behind. I wouldn't be surprised it's 2024, and then the state of North Dakota finally said, oh yeah, like COVID was a real thing and it really did impact prices. I think another factor is that states do have a political interest, and rightly so, to distribute these credits in an efficient manner. So one way of the ways that they do that is that they cap how many credits any one project can get. So that cap from project to project or state to state can look a lot different. Sometimes it's a per unit cap. Sometimes it's on a per square footage basis. Sometimes it's just on straight number of units. So think about that. Like if the cap is on a just number of homes that you're building, well, that same cap that could apply for someone building an apartment building with all one bedrooms is going to be the same as a tribe where you might be trying to build single family units with 3 and 4 bedroom units. So if that is the case, there's some challenges in that, because credits aren't going to go as far to build, say, 20 single family detached homes that need infrastructure. Ben, anything else that you have seen just kind of related to cost adjustments? Maybe it's additional credits that could be available from the state, or developers going after additional credits?
Yeah, it's a huge issue, as you can imagine, everywhere, in anything involving construction. And it's something that we have conversations with state agencies about. I was part of a session or roundtable with a state agency recently, and I've just written some comments in the past, and I know Travoy's had some recent comments with some other state agencies about the fact that it does cost more for tribes to build these projects. And so some states have been very responsive and very helpful Some states haven't understood that as well, but we've seen a number of projects go back and request additional credits. They've been able to pursue other grants and things like that, but it's a big challenge, and really that every project has inside or outside of Indian country. And so, from the state perspective, basically, I think every project in the last 2 or 3 years has come back and said, hey, I now have a problem because it costs way more to build than we all expected when we put this together. And so state agencies have had various approaches to trying to address that. Some better than others. And so, yeah, it's a very one case-by-case basis, I guess, is the answer.
Yeah. I think another thing there, to Ben's point, is that oftentimes if that opportunity is there to request additional credits, it's often very limited or not there at all. So it's extremely critical at the front end to be conservative and to really do the due diligence to really understand what those likely costs are, because number one, we only get one shot basically. If we get extra credits, they're going to be nominal at best. So we have to be accurate and have to be as conservative as possible. So we try to help our clients understand that construction cost from day one, that this is going to be a real impact. I think it's a disservice to our tribal partners to say, hey, this is a project that, we think you could get done for $150 a square foot, when there's nothing remotely close in the area that we know of that is anything less than $250 a square foot. So I think it starts with just some realistic planning that, this is the amount of tax credits that we're likely going to be able to pursue. And this is the reality of what the construction market looks like. Groups have to kind of go in with a good understanding that there may be a gap that has to be filled. And the better that we can kind of plan at the front end of what that gap looks like, the more easily a project is able to move forward once the tax credits are in hand. Now, just real quick on the structure here. Again, this kind of gets to where Ben and where the tax credit partner ends up being involved. So again, these are a federal credit that are allocated on a per population basis to each state. Then each individual state is delegated with the authority by the IRS to put these tax credits into projects. So in Wisconsin, that's the Wisconsin Housing Economic Development Authority. In North Dakota, that's the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency. So again, it's the state awarding federal credits. And what the big difference there is that the state kind of controls how that process looks. So what they do is every year they come up with the rule book for what that competition and how their allocation process is going to work. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But ultimately, they're allocating federal credits to a legal entity typically made up of a state limited partnership. And that state limited partnership typically looks like this, especially on our tribal projects. It includes the general partner or the tribe as the sole general partner, and then the tax credit investor partner being the sole limited partner. And what that means is there has to be a mechanism to facilitate 99.99% of those credits to the partner that needs those credits. So again, the tribe in this instance, they don't have an a need for the tax credits directly. What they need is that ability to leverage and benefit from the equity to make the project possible. Again, what happens is this is a competition, and this is where tribes can have a lot of influence at the local level in this process. Typically, this process is updated every single year. So we're always paying very close attention to all states where tribes are located to see, hey, is there systematic or incremental tweaks that could happen to benefit tribes more wholly? So in California, we were able to convince them that a tribal set aside, what they call the Native American apportionment, was warranted. And then we've sort of continued that discussion by continuing the conversation with tribes to say, hey, could the state increase that a little bit more to offset some of those things like Ben mentioned, that Linda mentioned about construction cost. So every year, typically, this process is updated. Sometimes states have what's called a 2-year qualified allocation plan, the rule book for how these tax credits are allocated. But there is some ability, I think, to influence this process. And I think that ability to influence the process is even stronger, even that your voice is heard more loudly when tribes kind of work together to say, hey, like, these are the real needs in our community. This is how we're being impacted. We expect some type of increase, or at least you to acknowledge that these issues are different when awarding tax credits into projects. Again, this competition varies widely from project to project and state to state. I would say that kind of a general overarching factor that relates in most states to the competition is a significant design element. So there is oftentimes points for energy efficiency or particular amenities to be incorporated. So there has to be a lot of due diligence and planning at the front end about what the project ultimately includes as far as design amenities and design features. I think another one is kind of across the board would be, are there services that are going to be available to residents of the project? Again, it's not really consistent from state to state how that translates into the competition, but I do think that tribes are at an advantage because oftentimes they're able to say, hey, our tribal entity is already providing this whole host of services from financial education to social services. We can easily incorporate that into the project without going to a third party outside entity collaborator to partner on. Ben, what other types of, maybe broad categories of commitments might a tribe make that you're looking at, or are you considering or want to know about after they get an award of tax credits when you come into the project?
In terms of commitments, we really just want to know that everybody's on board in terms of whether it's politically up, through the leadership, because that really makes the process much easier and much better. We've talked about there are these various challenges, costing amongst them, that having everybody being committed to the project is one of the key pieces there. And a lot of times on the financing side, there are ways to go after grants and other dollars to help backfill when there are cost increases. So it's really just a willingness to, everybody get their hands dirty and find a way to get a project done. That's key to us.
Absolutely. Yep. So again, this is the big difference between housing tax credits and NAHASDA. So under NAHASDA, families can go up to 80% of adjusted gross income. Typically, up until just very recently, like Ben mentioned, all of the families would have been at 60% AMI. So there is an opportunity now where you can have some in this 60 to 80 bracket, but those are going to be averaged with some families that are at that deeper 30 to 40% bracket. So typically on a whole, as a project across the board, the average is going to average 60% area median income. But one really important thing to note is that if a family's income increases down the road, say they move in, say they get married 6 months down the road or a year down the road, and they add a second household income, that family's income, as long as they qualify at that initial level. So again, Clallam County, let's assume a 4 moves in and maybe they qualify at that 30% level. If that family's income goes up later after they qualify initially, they do not have to move out of the tax credit unit. They're not penalized. They're not, the program is not intended to penalize them for getting a better job or bettering their situation. Adding household income is not a disqualifier as long as it continues to be compliant with the Housing Authority's internal policy. I think it's worth just, again, we're about running up on our time, and I want to make sure that we have an opportunity for any other questions that might come through in the chat as well. But I think it's worth talking about and kind of celebrating the great work that tribes are doing on a day-by-day basis. Ben, I know you and I have talked, and one of the things that I personally really love is just the opportunity to participate alongside tribes in their great work. I know that for a lot of tribes and tribal housing authorities, that's sometimes a thankless job. It's a hard job in many, many ways, but I think that it goes without saying that every single day tribes are out there doing tremendous work. This is just a sample of that, where whether it's single family homes or multifamily homes, but again, we realize the environment that you're working in, post-COVID, lack of NAHASDA resources to really meet the needs in your community. And yet you get outcomes like this, like at Pasquayaki, single family detached homes, 50 units. This is their 7th tax credit project. Again, you would never look at this and say, this is low income housing. I think the other thing that we're very fortunate to have a very small role in is helping tribes to exercise their own sovereignty, to say, hey, like, we don't want the old HUD housing from 1960. We're beyond that. Our families deserve better. We can do something better that our communities can be proud of. And I think this is an example of exactly that same thing, that, hey, this is 2022. This is 2023 now, actually. And we want something that's going to be an asset to our community for generations to come. I think the other thing that I'm always excited about is how groups are thinking about amenities that could be part of their project in their community as well. So this is single family detached units at Tohono O'odham. And as we scroll through here, let's see here. So on this particular end of the site, there's 2 different amenities. There's a wellness facility and a gymnasium. They use 2 separate funding sources, including competitive IHBG, and they also used housing tax credits to build those amenities. But by putting them on the same site, virtually adjacent to each other, they have this really awesome splash pad in between, connecting the two projects. And then that kind of combines to make this one really awesome amenity that's now available for families at Tohono O'odham. Just another example at Colville, a single family project. Again, this is a representative of another group outside the Tribal Housing Authority where there's lots and lots of housing needs. And another group at the tribe working and thinking about housing is not taking away or denigrating the work that the Housing Authority is doing. It's just saying, hey, we have 300 families on our waiting list. We can all be collectively thinking about this, what's in the interest of everyone. I'm going to show you just a few more quick multifamily examples. Again, this is an example at Yurok. So a mix of both multifamily units. So there's actually 5 units here. There's 2 units stacked on top of each other, and then 3 townhomes right adjacent to each other. So solar panels, metal roofs, cement board siding, and then these units are actually a duplex tucked back behind here where this opening is here, this doorway. There's a little 480 square foot accessory dwelling unit for an elder or for a student, kind of tucked back behind the garage and the rest of that unit. Totally private from the rest of the house, but this is actually a duplex with that accessory dwelling unit factored in. Elder units, again, concept where you can do a really nice common area community space. In this particular project, it's got an interior entrance and an exterior entrance, and then the 2-bedroom adjacent to it. It's got an interior, exterior, 2 bedrooms, 1.5 bath. So that bath is that for the guests is totally separate from the primary bath. Just really, really representative of what tribes are doing across the country. I'm going to close with this last one before we take an opportunity to wrap up. But again, this is I don't think that if you would have said 20 years ago that a tribe was going to take on a multifamily project like this, most tribes would say, probably not in my community. But, this is in Tucson. This is at Pasquayaki. They're saying, hey, we need a mix of single family units. We need townhomes. We need elder housing. We need young professional housing, and we need small units that young professionals can grow into. Maybe they're just starting out and have a small family. They don't want to live in a single family unit. So Pasquayaki, I think, is really, really representative of the fact that tribes have needs across the board, and there's no reason that housing tax credits can't be a resource to help meet that need. So I know we're coming up on our timeline. I don't see any other questions right now in the chat. I know Ben and I are more than happy to help with specific questions if you're talking about a project or ideas that you're thinking about now, if you want to ask, or feel free to reach out to us. Wista, is there any other questions that you see?
No questions, but I did want to make sure that you did see what Josh mentioned about funding for an apartment complex. He did mention that it's going to be for 15 to 20 families in the plan.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely the size of the project that we're talking about. So it's not going to be something where it's really worth your time to try to pursue this resource for like 3 units. You really need to get to a point where your tax credit request makes sense and is appealing to like a syndicator like Raymond James. But I think oftentimes that's like a very plausibly a 15 unit project, a 20 unit project, 25 unit project. I think our average tribal project size is probably right around 25 units. I think the biggest tribal project was a rehab project that maybe did 80 units all at one time. But I also think it's important that you kind of do a project that is comparable to the capacity of your team as well. So maybe there isn't appetite or maybe there isn't demand to do 150 units, but starting off with 30 could be a really great start to make a big dent in that waiting list and enable you to grow the skill set, to understand how this works, and then roll that into a future phase. Ben, you want to talk about it all? Just the groups that you've seen that have said, hey, like this works, we're going to continue down this same path and just do another project or do a 5th project.
Yeah, there are some tribes that have done, I think, 18 projects. Another, obviously, Red Lake is getting started on their 14th, and I would tell you, Adam does a great job of showing, what you can do. You can think big, you can dream big. Paskayaki is doing some amazing construction over there, but of course, there continues to be the reality of cost constraints and capacity of workforce available to you, and not to mention, you may have a huge waiting list you need to address. So, there are kind of those competing factors. So, there are projects where we're still doing something more basic because we're trying to basically make as many quality homes as we can, and some where you can do some of these more exciting features that look great and everything like that. So, I'd tell you continue to think big. But yes, there are those constraints that may limit you down to something less just to get the ball rolling and just to create that housing that people need, which is obviously the most basic and fundamental purpose and need here.
I think the other thing, Ben, is that a lot of times groups overlook how impactful rehab can be, and I say that because again, like you're minimizing your infrastructure expense, but it's also minimizing that operating expense, right? So if a group can put in a significant amount of investment into new mechanical systems and new roofing, that operating expense as far as ongoing maintenance is going to be extremely minimized for the next number of years for sure. But I think the other important thing there is that it's really putting money into that low-income family's pocket in the form of utility expenses, right? So if you can rehab a unit and put energy efficient mechanical and heating systems in, and you can put a brand new roof on and new insulation, and in the process, maybe you put solar panels on that rehab project and you lower that family's utility bill by $150 a month, that's real money in their pocket. That's real money that they can spend on daycare or better quality food or whatever it is, healthcare. So there's real substantive impacts that can come with a rehab project as well. Sometimes it's not always as flashy, but it oftentimes costs less and is can be very, very viable, especially for a first project, because it doesn't have that same infrastructure outlay that would be required on a new construction project. Awista, I know we're real close to being right at the time for today. Do you want to go ahead and wrap up?
Sure. Let me go ahead and pull up my screen. Thank you both very much for presenting today. Truly appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and launch the survey. If you could just go ahead and let us know how we did, we truly do appreciate it. It lets me know what I need to improve on and what I can do to make the trainings better for you. So please go ahead and let me know. Our next webinar is going to be February 16th. It's going to be Title VI Loan Guarantees, Another Strategy to Access Capital for Housing and Infrastructure, presented by Adam Rose and Brandy Liberty. Registration is free as always. It will be at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, and 11 a.m. Pacific. Please access our recordings at any time. We have a Cathedral of Webinars tab in a recorded webinar section. You can click on any one of the webinars that we have done for the past 18 months. Feel free to view them and share them with your friends and colleagues. This webinar will also be posted on our website. It should be on there before noon tomorrow morning. So please keep an eye out for that. Check out our upcoming events as well on our social media sites such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Snapchat. We even have a podcast titled Hopathanga. You can find that on Simplecast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Once again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you for participating, and thank you, Adam and Ben, for joining, for being the speakers of the webinar and doing an amazing job. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.